I'm Sam,
And this is Gabe.
and this is Coaster Wars.
All right, today's episode we have a classic taking on a special effects coaster. Right off the bat, these coasters can't get any more different at all.
I feel like we've been saying that about our past couple roller coasters, but it really kind of speaks to how different mine and Gabe's likes of coasters are, but also the different ones that we've ridden, because this is another one where Gabe hasn't ridden mine and I haven't ridden his.
Yes, well, this coaster for me really shows how much I love history and historical coasters. This really brings that out in me. I love old classic roller coasters. And that's what my number 13 is all about, is just a historical classic roller coaster.
And what I think my coaster really brings out in me is that I'm a movie buff, and this is a movie roller coaster, and that's one of the reasons why I love it. Well, and then another little small part of it, too, is it's also kind of a nostalgia factor in the fact that this is also one of the first coasters that I rode when I was little. So that's what makes it one of my favorites for me, so.
Absolutely. I think without further ado, I think it's time to introduce these fighters. What do you say?
Go ahead.
All right. In the red corner, standing at a compact height of 44 feet, reaching a top launch speed of 40 miles per hour, hailing from the tourist-ridden lands of Orlando, Florida, and the premier gym, it is Revenge of the Mummy! In the blue corner, standing at a height of 130 feet, reaching a top speed of 60 miles per hour, hailing from the hills of Virginia and the aerodynamics gym, it is the Loch Ness Monster! Let the fight begin! Alright, so my number 13 is Loch Ness Monster.
And my number 13 is Revenge of the Mummy.
So I think right away we got to mention the age difference between these two roller coasters.
Yes.
Loch Ness Monster was constructed in 1978, and Revenge of the Mummy was constructed in 2004. So you're looking at a over 20-year difference between these two roller coasters, and it's very noticeable in the ride experience. Would you agree with that?
100%. What Revenge of the Mummy really specializes in is it's amazing special effects and everything like that. But then from a roller coaster's perspective, this thing has 3 launches. One of them is backwards, and it includes 2 different switch tracks and a 180-degree turntable to get you through this entire ride. It's kind of insane.
Absolutely. Revenge of the Mummy was kind of the next step for Premier Rides, showing how innovative and different their ride designs could be. It's another indoor ride in Revenge of the Mummy.
Yep.
And it's like you said, special effects. Theming is number 1. Well, it's at Universal. And to compete with Disney, they have to have a ton of theming. Like, Universal's a theme park where Loch Ness Monster is kind of at more of an amusement park.
Yeah.
And that's definitely noticeable between these two rides.
For me, with the theming with this ride, because I always talk about it, and of course the queue line really does, but what I love about this ride is the theming extends through your entire ride experience. So with this ride, the original premise The original premise of this ride is that Revenge of the Mummy was another movie that they were making in the franchise. And so when you first come in, you get to see movie sets and storyboards and stuff like that. And then you're brought in to actually experience where a mummy has taken over the set. And there's even a small clip with Brendan Fraser in it, and there's there's a point in the ride where it's a fake out. It's the screen that shows a lady who's announcing the end of the ride and thank you for your experience, but then the mummy comes in and sucks her dry, and then you're shot forward on another launch. And as a kid, when I rode this, it actually got me. I thought it was the end of the ride, and then you're suddenly launched forward into, another really intense part of the ride, and it actually got me as a kid. It surprised me, and it was a lot of fun to ride.
Yeah, it sounds like it. This is a roller coaster that I have not been able to experience. So once again, our initial Universal trip was back when I was a little tiny baby kid, and I was not tall enough to get on any of the roller coasters at Universal, and that included the Mummy. So this is one that I've not been able to experience yet. However, the one picture that I see all over the place is of the flames above the roller coaster.
Oh my gosh. So I guess we should maybe talk about the layout of what this ride actually does. And I'll try and be as succinct as I possibly can because there's a lot to explain with this thing. But the first thing is to explain the car. It's a mine car, so it's not a traditional roller coaster train. It's got 4 rows back, it sits 4 across, and so it's really is a family ride. You can ride this with your kids. It's got a single lap bar, but it's also individual to each size. So as an adult, you'll be able to fit really nicely in this ride. And then basically, the first thing is you're led into one, it goes slow in the beginning, kind of leading you through. You get to see some animatronics, you see a couple movie screens, and then you're sent into a room where, if you've seen the Mummy movies, it's these scarab beetles, and they pop out of the walls, and they go screaming by, and then the ceiling lights on actual fire. Want to reiterate, actual fire, and then you're
Yeah,
shot
it's
backwards.
it's real flames. Like when you see the pictures of this ride, it is a real like flamethrower effect. And that was the
Yes.
one thing I just saw over and over and over again is the real live flames that come out of the ceiling.
Like
Um,
you can feel the heat from it when you're sitting in your car and it just cements like, oh my god, the ceiling is actually on fire.
yeah, it looks like a great experience. Just that one moment for me is what I noticed right away. I'm like, okay, that looks freaking awesome.
Oh,
And like I said, it's completely indoors too. So like you really get to feel that full, like you said, the full heat of what comes out of that flamethrower. It just looks awesome in a picture.
yes. So after your backwards launch, you go into a room where it does the 180-degree turntable, so you're literally actually physically turned around. And then this leads you into the uphill launch that is the fastest launch in the coaster. It's the one that launches you to, I think it's 40 miles per hour. And then you go down through the largest drop, which is 39 feet. It's a pretty intense part of the roller coaster. There's some 80-degree turns. And then you come into another room, and this is the part that I was talking about where it simulates the end of the ride, and then it's a fake out, and it launches you one last time into a pretty intense part of the ride that's got some hills and stuff in it. And then you're finally brought into the unload station because it has separate load and unload stations. And then it's just kind of like a funny bit. There's this little video where it's like I said, the Brendan Fraser kind of cameo on this ride, and he talks about how he didn't get his coffee or something, and then the mummy hands it to him and he screams. It's just a funny little end to the ride.
Yeah, would you say the launches are intense, or are they just more of a get you up to speed, or how would you describe each launch on this roller coaster?
Yeah, I honestly, even though it's not the fastest, I think the most intense one is the backwards one. And it's not really that it's intense, it's just the fact that you're going backwards and you don't expect it. So that would be the most intense, but none of them are really like super, they're nothing like a King Ka launch or a Max Force launch or anything like that. And even the fastest one, it's shooting you up a hill, so you gradually get speed as you're going up this hill, so that it's basically in the place of a chain lift instead of a slow chain lift. You have an actual launch up this hill. So none of them are too particularly intense, but it's one of those things where it's coupled with all these special effects, so I guess that maybe has a little bit more intensity because there's lights flashing in your face and there's sounds playing in your ears, and so it kind of attacks your senses like that, but in terms of actual physical launch, it isn't that intense, no.
Yeah, I feel like the launches on this roller coaster are more of a functional kind of. I mean, if you had to, power the train to go up a lift hill every time you wanted to, gain speed, it make the ride very boring.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I feel like the launches are more functional to the point where they're just there to get you moving, not necessarily an actual part of the ride experience. Would you agree with that statement? Or
Yeah, if you really had to think about it, like if you had to sit through an actual lift hill, they would then have to put some kind of element or video or animatronics around this lift hill. And like if you think about it, on some rides, they can be pretty slow and just kind of inch you up this lift hill. So it really is a more functionality kind of side of things. On top of that, there are the LIM launch, which isn't quite as punchy as some of the other launches as we were talking about in our previous episode. And on top of that, it was kind of one of those things where they particularly, I think, used a launch system too to time it to the different special effects that they had around the ride. So that, because it has to be timed with this animatronic moving at this time or this video playing at this time. And if it were off, it would ruin that experience.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Is this another Universal ride that features a lot of in-queue theming, not just the ride experience itself?
Oh yeah, 100%. Specifically in the queue ride, it's what I was talking about before, where you're led into like almost what would be a movie warehouse kind of deal, where you see storyboards and set pieces and stuff like that from this what would have been a new movie for this movie franchise.
Yeah, that sounds like a really, really great experience from start to finish. I'm very disappointed I did not get to. However, there's 2 new roller coasters at Universal that are really on my bucket list, so I hope to get back and experience the Mummy as well. It's definitely on my list of roller coasters that I need to ride.
Oh yeah, and there was that small scare back in 2022 where they closed it down for a little bit to do some refurbishment on the ride, and there was a scare that it wouldn't be open. And actually, this is also a favorite, one of our mom's favorite roller coasters, and she thought it was still closed, and I'm like, oh no, it reopened, and she's like, what? I was down in Florida, why didn't I go back there and ride it? So we're very happy to see that it was reopened. So.
Absolutely. It's one of those coasters that you hope kind of sticks around for a while, just because you said the nostalgic reasons and the fact that you love the Mummy movies. I know you do.
Oh, yes. Yes, I do.
So we hope it sticks around for a long time. The same can be said about my number 13 roller coaster. Let's change gears a little bit here. Start talking about the Loch Ness Monster. The biggest wow factor about this roller coaster is definitely the interlocking vertical loops. That is what this is all about. The cool thing about this ride is that it's at Busch Gardens, which they do theming, but not on the same level as Universal or Disney, obviously. But I would say it's better than like a Six Flags themed park, or I would say it's even better than some of the Cedar Fair theming that you see at Cedar Fair parks. Busch Gardens puts a little bit more effort. They only have 2 amusement parks. They have the one in Virginia and the one in Florida. So they can invest a little bit more money into the theming aspects instead of just buying 7 roller coasters, in a year and building them. They buy maybe 1 or 2 and focus a little bit more on theming. What kind of research and what did you discover about this ride that you haven't experienced that you'd like to mention?
Well, so, like you said, definitely those interlocking vertical loops. Like Gabe said, I have never been to this park, and I have never ridden this roller coaster, and so I honestly had no idea what this ride was. And you probably have told me about it, but it's one of those things where it just, I haven't ridden it, didn't stick in my mind, so I went to go look it up, and that was the first thing, was that it was an interlocking loop coaster, and then on top of that, it has 2 lift hills. And I was like, what the heck is this ride? How have I never heard of this thing before? And then of course, and I was like, okay, interlocking loops, like, is this like a 2001, 2002 kind of coaster? And then to find out it was built by Aero before computers in 1978, like, this thing is an engineering marvel. And then on top of that, it's sort of a terrain coaster on 2. And I'm also partial to terrain coasters. I think they're very cool. So I'm very mad that I have not ridden this coaster yet, and will make it a point to go ride this coaster.
Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely a terrain coaster. So where they built this roller coaster, at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg in Virginia, they have a river flowing through the center of the park. And basically what happened is it created a nice valley around this river. And that's where they built this roller coaster. So the loops are in the bottom of the valley right over the water. It's a super cool picture moment. Like, if you like to take photographs of roller coasters, this is one that you have to take pictures of, because it's just a beautiful environment. And then they built the rest of the roller coaster around the valley of the river and the hills in Virginia that you can see there. And it's definitely 100% a terrain coaster. And it does have 2 lift hills. So the reason that it has 2 lift hills is mainly because to gain enough speed to go through each loop, 1 lift hill wasn't enough. However, the second lift hill doesn't actually drop right into the vertical loop. The first one doesn't either. So it's not one of those things where you notice the second lift hill, I think, as much. Like on the Beast, that second lift hill exists. Like it's a super long, drawn out lift hill, super tall. Like that is part of the ride experience, is the 20-second pause you get. Where this one, you don't notice it quite as much. It doesn't pull. The biggest thing a second lift does is it kills pacing in a roller coaster. That's really what it does. But the cool thing about the Loch Ness Monster is pacing is really not part of the ride experience. The ride experience is the vertical lift, or is the vertical loops, and then along with that, the Helix Tunnel. That's really what this ride's all about. So the pacing that gets taken out because of that second lift hill doesn't really kill the ride as much.
I do have to ask about that Helix Tunnel, because to get more information on the ride, I was watching a review of the ride, and this guy, he didn't like the Helix Tunnel. He thought it was slow and it was boring and it shouldn't be there. So what's your opinion on the Helix Tunnel?
So the thing you got to remember is this roller coaster was built in 1978. That's the one thing you have to consider when doing a review on this roller coaster, when doing a comparison to anything else, is it's ancient technology. They don't design roller coasters like this anymore. They use computers, they use computer design, computer calculations. The other thing that's really noticeable about aero rides is they use concentric circles, which basically means that a radius, either a turn radius or a hill radius, is a continuous radius. It doesn't change. So what that does is it creates little speed bumps, or I call it triangles. That's where you get the aero kind of triangle airtime hill, is because the transitions between each curve aren't smooth. So that's where you get the roughness from in an aero roller coaster.
We saw that, sorry to interject real quick, we saw that really well on our Six Flags Great Adventure trip. There was an aero mine car ride there. And it's geared as a family friendly. You can bring your kids on it. It's got it's not a super intense ride, but towards the end of that ride was a little airtime hill that really kind of just jerked you out of your seat, and we're like, we were not expecting that on this little mine car ride.
Yeah, and the other thing that Aero did is all of their inversions were copy and paste inversions. They were all the same size, all the same dimensions. So if you rode a corkscrew, like let's say you rode the corkscrew at Cedar Point, you've ridden the corkscrew out in California, or you've ridden the Demon and their corkscrews already. It's the same experience. So for them to kind of go out of their way to put in a Helix, something different, it's not something you see on a lot of aero roller coasters, especially from this era. So for me, it was something cool. I like the fact that it's in a tunnel, so it's not just a wide open Helix, and it makes it feel a little bit more fast paced. But at the beginning, I would agree it is a little bit slow, because you come up over the lift hill and it's only like a 10-foot drop that gets you into it, so you don't gain a lot of speed. However, it's a descending Helix, so as you go around the Helix, you get closer and closer to the ground, and that makes it gain a lot of speed. And towards the end, it actually is somewhat intense. Like I said, you can't compare it to a modern roller coaster, because it's not a modern roller coaster. It just isn't. Mm-hmm. So I think to compare it to, like if you were to take this and compare it to a modern B&M, like invert,
yep,
you can't do that. You're doing it a disservice. You got to compare it to the roller coasters of its time period. And when you do that, you really realize how awesome of a roller coaster this really was when it was first constructed. To have 2 lift hills, to feature the Helix, to have the interlocking loops is just a crazy feat. And the fact they all slammed this into a valley by a river is even cooler.
I
So,
100% agree.
me, it's just the historical part of this ride. It is an ace historical landmark. That's the other thing I'd like to mention. So this roller coaster ain't going anywhere anytime soon.
Hmm. One thing I am a little bit disappointed is that even if I did get to go ride it, they used to run this where they could run because of I think it's because of the two lift hills, but they're able to run it where they'd have trains going through both loops at the same time. And they had to discontinue that for safety reasons. And then they also changed what trains they were running on it, and now they only run two trains. They used to run more trains and were able to do that. And so I'm like, well, that would have been really, really cool to go through these interlocking vertical loops with another train racing by you. But it still sounds really cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. So what you're talking about, the different trains, they, one of the things that Busch Gardens does really well is they maintain their rides very well. Because like I said, they only have two parks. So they only have two sets of roller coasters to worry about. And on that factor, what they did is they modernized the trains. So right before Arrow went out of business, they ordered new trains from them. So they have the more modern trains from Arrow. And it does improve the ride experience. But what happened is they only ordered, I think it was 3 trains, and they only run 2 at a time now. That's why you don't get that dueling anymore, is because you need more trains on the track to do it.
Yep. Okay, that makes
So
sense.
when they ordered the new trains, they only ordered a couple of them instead of having a full roller coaster set, and that's why you don't get that dueling anymore.
Yep.
But even without that dueling, it's still a really cool ride experience. There is some theming in the queue line, just talking about, Loch Ness Monster and trying to hunt for Nessie, and you're basically like the theme is you're like a fisherman or whatever, and you're trying to catch the Loch Ness Monster. That's how they theme the queue. So that is one nice thing. The only downfall to this ride is it is incredibly popular at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. A lot of the locals love this ride, and then a lot of people go on it because it is not crazy intense. So they'll bring their younger children and stuff on it. So you can wait in line for a long time for an old roller coaster. But I think that really attests to its ride experience and how much people really love this roller coaster. I love it. It's one of my favorite. It really is.
Yeah. To speak to that theming a little bit, what I could find about the theming is part of it is the actual physical track. It's got a yellow track, but then the train that you're riding in is green, like Nessie. And then, like we were saying, it's designed like you're on an expedition, so they have expedition equipment, and there's a submarine. And then as you go further into the queue line, it's actually designed after a Scottish castle. Because, of course, this is in the Scotland portion of the park, and that's where the legend of the Loch Ness Monster comes from. So, there is theming here, and I could see some pictures online and stuff. I'm like, I actually want to come see this. It looks really cool. So.
Yeah, and like I said, they've taken really good care of this ride. One thing I'd like to mention is they're completely retracking it over the winter. So what they're doing is, and you can actually see pictures of pieces heading towards the park on truck beds, is they're completely retracking this roller coaster from start to finish. But the cool thing about it is they are still using the old design features that Arrow used. So it's still going to be the completely welded tubular track. It's still going to feature the concentric circles, and it's still going to feature the non-heart lining curves and banking. So it'll still have that old Arrow feel, but it's going to have brand new track. So it might be a little bit smoother than it has been in the past couple of years, which I think is going to be awesome. I would love to get back out to this when they finish the retracking just to see, how it was when it was new. Basically what they're doing is refurbishing it to when it was brand new in 1978, which is super, super cool. And that's another reason why I say this coaster isn't going anywhere anytime soon, because they are going to completely retrack it.
That is amazing. I can't wait to get here and ride it. I should try and get back there next year, right after they've retracted it, so I can just ride a brand new coaster.
Yeah, no, and that's what it's going to be. It's just going to be a brand new coaster, but like it still was designed in 1978. So it'll be a brand new coaster, but it'll still have those old design features. So they're not removing, some of what Loch Ness Monster is.
Oh, yeah.
The one thing I like to mention is and you tapped on this a little bit, the roller coaster is slower. So the biggest complaint about Arrow rides is they're rough, uncomfortable, ping pong your head back and forth. This one still has that to a point, but it's not as extreme as some of the corkscrew models or some of their mega loopers, because it's just a slower paced roller coaster. So you hit those curves and those bumps and stuff, you're not going as fast, so it's not quite as rough, which does make it a little bit better of a ride experience. For me, it's my favorite Arrow that I've ever been on. So I think that really attests to the fact that it's not as rough as some of the other ones.
That's really nice. It really makes it a good family coaster, and this one would be great if, like, you have a younger kid that's maybe been on some coasters but never been on one that's upside down, and it'll be able to take them through it a little bit slower, and then on top of that, it would just be a really cool one to ride because you'll have that other loop there, so...
Absolutely. The other notable thing is that this roller coaster does not feature corkscrews, which is really what Arrow was known for, being incredibly rough. The vertical loops aren't as bad because there's not the laterals and the banging back and forth that you get in the corkscrews. So that also makes it a smoother, more enjoyable experience.
I remember that with Demon and how you had to, like, brace yourself before you went through those corkscrews. At least I did because I'm shorter, so my head was in those headrests, and you just had to... It was one of those rides you rode once at the beginning of the day, and if you rode it again, it was wait until the end of the day.
Oh, yes, for sure. But this ride you can ride over and over again, I think. And it's a fun experience. I really do. We're kind of reaching that time here where we got to start picking a winner. I'm just going to go right ahead and say it. Loch Ness Monster is my pick here. I got to take it. It's just... I love history. That's what I'm about. I even made a episode on my YouTube channel just about historical roller coasters. I love history. I love roller coaster history in general. This is, like I said, it's an ACE historical landmark, so it's in the Roller Coaster Hall of Fame is kind of what I call it. And it is so good for how old of a ride this is. And you know, it is an engineering masterpiece. It really is. And for me, that reason alone, I got to take Loch Ness Monster here. It's just, I love history, and that's what it comes down to.
See, and with this one, I think I'm going to kind of pull from Gabe's hat like he did in our first episode. And as much as I love The Mummy, and I love those movies, and the nostalgia factor, I'm leaning a little bit towards Loch Ness Monster in this situation because of that mystique of a ride that I haven't ridden, and the historical aspect of it, and the running through the terrain, and the double lift hills, and it doesn't lack the theming. There's theming there. That Scottish castle actually sounds really cool to walk through before you get into this ride. So I think I'm going to agree with Gabe in this instance, and I'm going to go with Loch Ness Monster. It just sounds like a really cool old ride, and it sounds like it would be awesome to experience.
In my opinion, it's one of the most underappreciated roller coasters in the country. I really can say that. And even for me, putting it at number 13, I feel like that's still low. I feel like I could probably rank it a little bit higher on my top 15. But the reason it really makes it for me is the historical significance of this ride. But I suppose I say, that wraps up this episode pretty good. What do you say?
I agree. I don't even know what our next episode is.
I'm pulling it up right now. Our next episode is going to be a repeat coaster. And once again, two coasters that could not be any further apart on the spectrum. The biggest thing is going to be, speed. I call my roller coaster, my number 12 is going to be speed. And then your number 12 would probably be intensity. Speed versus intensity. That's these two roller coasters. I think that's a good comparison there. Definitely, once again, two roller coasters on the opposite end of the spectrum. That is for sure.
Sounds like we got another good matchup ahead of us. Jeez.
Yes. Wow. The one I'm really looking forward to is number 11. I don't know if you can see that on your screen or not.
No, I didn't.
But our number 11 coasters, that's going to be one of the best battles we're going to have in our top 15, I really think.
That's a cool
and the cool thing about our number 11s is they're in the same park.
Oh, dang. We are recording.
So yeah, our next episode next week is going to be speed versus intensity. I think that's a good way to describe both those roller coasters for sure. It'll be an interesting battle. I think it'll be a tough one for your roller coaster. I really do. But we'll see.
It'll be a nice little fight, and like you said, comparing coasters that you don't normally compare, so I think it'll be a good matchup. So we'll see everybody next week.
Yep, see everybody next week.